The hastily assembled Earth delegation arrives at the Antarctic Research Station within 18 hours of first contact. Dr. Madeleine Foster, still wearing the same rumpled clothes from the initial transmission, greets Commander Zextoral with unexpected familiarity. "Your atmospheric requirements are fascinating," she says, examining the commander's environmental suit without waiting for formal introductions. "That methane-argon mix must make space travel challenging. Our early suits leaked like sieves." Zextoral's translator struggles with her rapid speech patterns. The commander had studied 17 languages during preparation for this mission, but human English defied the cooperative's linguistic models with its contradictory rules and contextual meanings. "Our vessel detected no functional planetary defense grid," Zextoral states, attempting to establish the expected power dynamic. "Do your nations not fear external threats?" Dr. Foster exchanges glances with Captain Mendez, who has just entered the room. "We have defenses," Mendez says simply, offering no elaboration. The implied threat hangs in the air until Foster breaks the tension with a laugh. "What my colleague means is that we prefer not to point weapons at visitors before learning their intentions." Bad manners. Behind them, technicians wheel in carts laden with refreshments, including, impossibly, approximations of cooperative delicacies. Foster notices Zextoral's compound eyes widening at the sight. "We synthesized some molecular analogs based on atmospheric samples from your ship's exhaust," she explains. "They're probably terrible, but we wanted to make an effort." The gesture, an impossibility given the time frame and humanity's supposed technological level, unsettles the cooperative delegation more than any show of force could have. Later, as the formal meeting begins, the humans present a comprehensive first contact package. Translation matrices, cultural overviews, simplified scientific exchanges. The work of months, somehow completed overnight. "When did you begin preparing this material?" Zextoral asks. "After confirming your ship wasn't a sensor malfunction," answers Dr. Chen, the xenolinguist. "We had about 40 hours. "Impossible," states the cooperative science officer. "The computational requirements alone." "Oh, we didn't use computers for most of it," Chen interrupts. "We just had people working on it." "How many people?" "About 3 million, give or take," Foster says casually. "Once we posted the challenge online, volunteers started collaborating." The translation matrix was crowdsourced from linguistics departments across 57 countries. The cultural package came from anthropology students. The refreshments were figured out by a culinary chemistry forum. The implications stagger the cooperative delegation. Their species required central coordination for complex tasks, with clear hierarchies and specialized roles. The idea of millions of unrelated individuals spontaneously organizing around a problem, without direct compensation or command structures, violated their understanding of sentient behavior. More disturbing still was the speed. The cooperative had spent decades planning first contact protocols. Humans had matched their efforts in less than 2 days, using primarily recreational time and voluntary contributions. As the meeting concludes, Zextoral makes an urgent, encrypted transmission to the Cooperative High Council. The message contains only one line. "Classification adjustment required. Humans are not pre-integration primitives. They are something we have never encountered before." What Zextoral couldn't articulate, even to the Council, was the feeling that permeated the cooperative delegation. The unsettling sense that they weren't dealing with a less advanced civilization, but rather one that had developed along such different lines that traditional metrics of advancement had become meaningless. Ambassador Krilnak signals his aides to halt the technology demonstration. The carefully orchestrated display of cooperative superiority has clearly failed to achieve its intended effect. Time for a different approach. "You mentioned our resource operation near Jupiter," Krilnak states, mandibles clicking in what his species recognizes as diplomatic aggression. "If you were aware, why did you not contact us sooner?" Dr. Foster shrugs. "We were still debating the appropriate response. Some felt we should demand compensation for mining in our system. Others thought we should study your techniques without revealing our knowledge. And what decision did your planetary government reach? Krillnax asks. The human delegation exchanges glances that the cooperative's cultural experts cannot decipher. We don't exactly have a planetary government, Captain Mendez explains. Different nations had different opinions. Krillnax's exoskeleton stiffens in shock. The concept is almost incomprehensible, a spacefaring species without unified governance. The cooperative's foundational principle is that technological advancement requires centralized authority. It's why all 17 member species developed global governments before achieving interplanetary travel. Then who speaks for Earth in these negotiations? Demands Krillnax. We all do, in different ways, says Dr. Chen. I represent the Scientific Coalition. Captain Mendez represents the Defense Alliance, and Dr. Foster represents the Technological Advancement Consortium. Together, we cover about 70% of Earth's population and resources. And the remaining 30%. They'll probably complain about whatever we agree to, Mendez says with a half-smile. The cooperative delegation's confusion is evident even across species barriers. Their translation algorithms struggle to contextualize human diplomatic structures that have no parallels in their experience. Krillnax attempts to regain control of the meeting. Our scans indicate your species has only achieved rudimentary fusion power and lacks fundamental technologies such as gravity manipulation, faster-than-light communication, or unified field theory applications. That's mostly accurate, Foster acknowledges. Though we've had theoretical models for gravity manipulation for decades, we just haven't found practical applications worth the energy expenditure. The casual dismissal of what the cooperative considers a cornerstone technology momentarily silences the alien delegation. Dr. Chen taps her tablet, projecting a holographic display of the solar system. Since we're being transparent, we detected another of your vessels near Mars last month. The energy signature was different from your mining operation. Research vessel, perhaps. This information was supposed to be classified at the highest level. The research vessel employed the cooperative's most advanced stealth technology that, according to all cooperative understanding, should be completely undetectable to a civilization at humanity's development stage. How did you detect it? Asks the cooperative security attaché, breaking protocol. Gravitational microlensing, Foster replies. One of our astronomy students was testing a new detection algorithm and noticed anomalous readings. Nothing special, just basic physics applied creatively. The delegation's scientific advisor leans toward Krillnax, whispering urgently. The advisor's specialized knowledge confirms what should be impossible. The basic physics Dr. Foster described so casually would require computational capabilities far beyond what the human should possess. We propose an exchange program, Krillnax announces abruptly, deviating from the prepared diplomatic sequence. Selected human representatives would visit our central station, while cooperative specialists study your civilization more thoroughly. What the ambassador doesn't reveal is the real purpose behind the proposal. The High Council needs to determine whether humans truly lack advanced technology or are simply concealing their capabilities, and more importantly, to understand how they've achieved results that should be technologically impossible. As the meeting adjourns, Krillnax notices Dr. Foster studying his environmental suit with unusual intensity. Is something troubling you, Doctor? He asks. Just curious about your suit's power source, she replies. The emission spectrum suggests quantum entanglement principles, but the efficiency curve is unlike anything we theorized. Elegant solution. Krillnax says nothing, but makes a mental note to have the human delegation's quarters thoroughly scanned for surveillance devices during their journey to the cooperative station. Foster had just correctly identified, from mere external observation, the classified operating principles of technology that had taken the cooperative 3 centuries to develop. The morning after Engineer Okafer's small alignment correction, the ship's command staff holds an emergency meeting behind sealed doors. Captain Vrenlax reviews security feeds with growing agitation. She bypassed 7 security protocols without triggering a single alarm. The security chief reports. Systems designed to detect the most sophisticated cooperative infiltration techniques. Could she have had assistance? Asks the executive officer. Perhaps the other humans. Okafor acted alone, interrupts Chief Engineer Vrentalik. The others were in their quarters. More concerning is what she actually did. The engineer projects a complex diagnostic display. She didn't just adjust the alignment. She fundamentally restructured the safety override architecture. Is it dangerous? Demands the captain. Quite the opposite, Vrentalik admits reluctantly. Her configuration is demonstrably superior. The triple redundancy system we've used for 8 centuries is apparently inefficient. The security chief bristles. So we should be grateful for unauthorized access to critical systems. On the other side of the ship, Dr. Zhang sits cross-legged on the floor of the observation deck, watching stars streak by. Dr. Patel joins him, carrying 2 cups of a beverage the ship's synthesizers have approximated as coffee. The security team has been following me since yesterday. Zhang mentions without looking away from the viewport. Not very subtly, either. Patel hands him a cup. Okafor's little engineering stunt has them spooked. They've doubled the guard rotation outside our quarters. Zhang sips the coffee substitute and winces. This tastes like it was designed by someone who only had coffee described to them. I tried explaining the molecular structure, but their culinary database has no analog. A comfortable silence falls between them, broken only when Zhang asks, "Have you noticed anything odd about their medical technology?" Patil considers. Beyond the obvious advancements, yes, their approach is extraordinarily compartmentalized. Their specialists seem to understand their specific domains in incredible depth, but struggle with cross-disciplinary connections. Exactly, Zhang agrees. Their entire knowledge structure is built in vertical silos, brilliant within disciplines, but blind to horizontal connections. Are humans really that different? Patil asks. Our history forced generalization, Zhang replies. Limited resources, competing priorities. We couldn't afford to pursue pure specialization. Even our most brilliant minds had to maintain breadth to survive. In the ship's communal area, Captain Mendez and Major Williams engaged several cooperative security officers in what began as casual conversation, but has evolved into a philosophical debate about tactical doctrine. Your approach relies too heavily on technological superiority, Williams argues. What happens when your advantage fails? Superior technology doesn't fail, counters a cooperative officer. The statistical probability. Everything fails eventually, Mendez interrupts. Murphy's Law. The translator pauses, unable to find a cooperative equivalent for the concept. If something can go wrong, it will, Williams explains. Every human military plans assuming our technology will fail at the worst possible moment. The cooperative officers exchange troubled glances. Their entire strategic doctrine assumes technological reliability. The concept of planning for systemic failure isn't merely foreign, it's philosophically destabilizing. Later that night, Okafor finds the ship's junior engineers waiting outside her quarters. The youngest approaches nervously. We reviewed your containment field modifications, he begins hesitantly. Could you explain how you identified the improvement opportunity? Okafor considers the request. These aren't senior officers seeking to discipline her. They're genuinely curious engineers, professional pride momentarily overcoming species distrust. It's about pattern recognition, she explains, gesturing them inside. Your systems are beautifully designed, but they evolve through iterative improvements rather than fundamental rethinking. For the next 3 hours, she sketches principles on a borrowed tablet, explaining human engineering philosophy. The alien engineers ask increasingly sophisticated questions, their initial skepticism giving way to professional curiosity. When they finally leave, the senior among them pauses at the door. Your approach is dangerous, he states flatly. It violates established safety protocols refined over centuries. But it works better, Okafor points out. Yes, The engineer admits, that is precisely what makes it dangerous. In his private quarters, Commander Zextoril reviews the day's reports with growing concern. The humans aren't merely adapting to cooperative technology. They're questioning foundational principles, finding efficiencies and connections that generations of cooperative experts have overlooked. And they're doing it not through superior knowledge, but through different thinking patterns, patterns that might prove either invaluable or destabilizing to the carefully ordered cooperative society. Security Officer Vrita Pol forwards her latest report to the High Council with a priority designation that hasn't been used in 37 years. The human scientist has progressed from accessing information to reorganizing it. In his quarters, Dr. Zhang has created what he calls a cognitive map of cooperative knowledge. Holographic strings connect disparate concepts across seemingly unrelated fields, forming patterns that Vrita Pol finds simultaneously beautiful and disturbing. Your species organizes information taxonomically, Zhang explains when she finally confronts him. Hierarchical categories with clear boundaries. It's elegant but constrains lateral thinking. Knowledge requires structure, she counters. Otherwise, it becomes chaos. Zhang smiles. Sometimes you need a little chaos to find new order. He gestures to a floating cluster where agricultural algorithms intersect with space-time equations. Take this connection. Your agricultural systems use probability fields to optimize crop yields across different environments. Your physicists use similar mathematics to describe quantum probability distributions, but they use different terminology and never compare notes. Vrita Pol stares at the connection. These fields developed independently over thousands of years. The similarity is coincidental or fundamental, Zhang suggests. Both describe complex systems with probabilistic outcomes. By cross-applying the agricultural optimization techniques to quantum fluctuations, you could potentially improve matter-energy conversion efficiency by at least 26%. The security officer freezes. The human has just casually proposed an improvement to one of the cooperative's most critical technologies, an advancement that would have strategic implications across 17 star systems. How did you reach this conclusion? She demands. Zhang shrugs. Humans are pattern matching machines. We evolved to recognize connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. It's how we survived as hunter-gatherers, connecting animal migration patterns with seasonal changes, plant growth with soil conditions. Nothing special. Meanwhile on Earth, the cooperative scientific liaison, Research Director Trazcan, sits in stunned silence as his human guide explains the organization of their fusion research data. So these three papers directly contradict each other? He asks incredulously. Yes, they represent competing theoretical models, explains Dr. Abigail Rodriguez. Team Alpha and Team Zeta have been academic rivals for decades, and both receive funding despite the contradiction. Of course, scientific progress often comes from competing models. Eventually, experimental evidence will favor one approach, or more likely, some hybrid of both. Trazcan's sensory tendrils curl in distress. This is completely contrary to cooperative methodology. Resources are allocated only to approaches with highest probability of success. Rodriguez laughs. If we did that, we'd miss all the beautiful accidents. Some of our greatest discoveries came from research that initially seemed unpromising. She pulls up another document, handwritten notes from a leading researcher, filled with crossed-out equations, coffee stains, and margin doodles. Dr. Yamamoto's initial fusion breakthrough came from a mistake, she explains. He was attempting something else entirely when he noticed an unexpected reaction. If he'd been following rigid protocols, he would have dismissed it as experimental error. Trazcan's translator struggles to find appropriate terms for his response. The concept of embracing error runs counter to the cooperative's entire epistemological framework. Back at the cooperative station, the High Council receives Vrita Pol's report along with a separate communication from the Library Archives Division. For the first time in recorded cooperative history, new knowledge pathways have spontaneously formed within the central database itself. The library's adaptive architecture, designed to organize information based on access patterns, has begun creating Zhang-like connections between previously unrelated knowledge domains. More concerning still, these new pathways are demonstrably more efficient for information retrieval and cross-referencing. The human isn't just learning from our database, concludes the chief archivist. Our database is learning from him. In the Council's secure meeting chamber, a debate rages over whether to restrict Zhang's access. The Security Division argues for immediate limitations, while the Science Directorate counters that his insights are too valuable to suppress. Neither approach addresses the fundamental issue, observes Elder Counselor Vex Mora. The human is not merely accessing our knowledge, he's reframing it. And in doing so, revealing blind spots in our thinking that have persisted for millennia. The unspoken question hangs in the chamber. If one human, with limited access and resources, can reshape their understanding so profoundly in mere days, what might happen if humanity gained full access to cooperative knowledge? The Cooperative War College convenes an emergency analysis session. Tactical experts from 17 species gather to dissect Major Williams' simulation performance, a performance that has triggered security protocols dormant for centuries. The human identified our concealed strategic asset through environmental cues we considered imperceptible, states Admiral Vrector, the college's senior instructor. More concerning, she exploited systemic vulnerabilities we hadn't recognized in our own simulation. The holographic replay shows Williams' unconventional force distribution, focusing not on direct combat strength, but on what she termed asymmetric advantage points. Rather than deploying defenses evenly, she concentrated them at seemingly random locations that only later proved to be critical choke points when the invasion's true objective became clear. Her approach lacked doctrinal consistency, notes a Thraxian tactical specialist. Some units received no orders for extended periods, while others executed micro-maneuvers with no apparent strategic value. Until they all synchronized perfectly during the final phase, counters a Vulturan observer. What appeared to be randomness was actually choreography on a scale our analysts couldn't perceive. Outside the analysis chamber, Williams sits alone in the War College's observation deck, watching alien ships maneuver in precise formations around the station. A door slides open, admitting Admiral Vrector. Your performance has created quite a stir, Major, he says, settling his massive frame beside her. I just played to win, she replies. Isn't that the point? The point was to test your approach against our established doctrine. You were expected to lose, honorably. Williams turns to face him. You designed an unwinnable scenario. It was not unwinnable, merely beyond the capabilities of conventional tactics. The simulation has been used for 3 centuries to teach the necessity of strategic sacrifice. Sometimes victory is impossible without accepting significant losses. Human military history suggests otherwise. Williams says, apparent no-win scenarios often result from limited imagination rather than genuine tactical impossibility. The Admiral's gill slits pulse with agitation. You speak of imagination, yet your tactics relied heavily on precise mathematical calculations, probability matrices we detected in your command console's processing patterns. Williams smiles. Math was just a tool. The key was redefining the victory conditions. Explain. Your simulation assumes conventional military objectives: territory, assets, force preservation. I calculated that the invaders valued the data repository above all else, making everything else potential sacrificial material, including civilian population centers, Vrector notes disapprovingly. I didn't sacrifice civilians. I evacuated critical zones and used empty infrastructure as bait. The simulation registered population movement as completed before engagement. The Admiral accesses a tactical display. You are correct. How did you execute a complete civilian evacuation within the time frame? Our analysts calculated it would require at least 30 hours. Fear is efficient, Williams replies. I triggered environmental alerts that prompted self-evacuation through predicted response patterns. Humans call it controlled panic, directing fear instead of fighting it. In another section of the station, the cooperative assessment team reviews William's full service record, transmitted from Earth upon request. The psychological profile contradicts their observations. Williams is rated as conventionally minded and procedurally oriented by human standards, having been passed over for advancement due to insufficient creative problem-solving. If this human represents conventional tactical thinking, murmurs the chief assessor, what would an exceptionally creative human commander accomplish? The question resonates through subsequent analysis sessions as experts attempt to reverse engineer Williams' approach. They discover that her tactics incorporated elements from Earth conflicts spanning 5,000 years, everything from ancient siege warfare to modern cyber deception, seamlessly blended into a hybrid approach that exploited weaknesses in the cooperative's compartmentalized thinking. Most disturbing is her use of psychological manipulation, not just against enemy forces, but incorporating the anticipated psychological responses of her own units and civilian populations as tactical elements. She had treated fear, confusion, and even hope as resources to be deployed alongside conventional assets. Admiral Vrektor's final report to the High Council contains an unprecedented recommendation: immediate reassessment of cooperative strategic doctrine in light of human cognitive approaches. Their apparent technological limitations may be irrelevant given their capacity to achieve complex objectives through unconventional pathways. The classified addendum, viewable only to Council members, is more direct. If this represents average human military thinking, we cannot predict what their exceptional minds might accomplish. Strategic parity may be impossible if they ever focus their cognitive diversity on military objectives. 3 days after Dr. Patel's experimental treatment halted the cellular degradation in tissue samples, the Medical Ethics Committee reconvenes an emergency session. The meeting chamber, designed for calm deliberation, crackles with tension. The patient is demanding access to the treatment, reports Chief Medical Officer Relva Han, sensory appendages twitching with agitation. Citizen Thex Anner claims the successful tissue trials justify proceeding with full biological application. Unprecedented, declares the senior ethicist. No experimental protocol has ever advanced from initial tissue success to full application without intermediate testing phases. Dr. Patel, seated at the far end of the chamber, remains silent until directly addressed. Human doctor, the committee chair intones formally. Explain how your treatment functions. Our analysis cannot determine its mechanism of action. Patel hesitates. That's because it doesn't have a single mechanism. It's a cascading intervention. Each component triggers responses that enable subsequent components to function. Impossible, states the xenobiological specialist. Such a treatment would require perfect prediction of complex biological interactions across multiple systems. Not perfect prediction, Patel corrects. Flexible adaptation. The compound sequence contains redundancies that activate only when needed, depending on the specific cellular environment they encounter. The committee exchanges troubled glances. Cooperative medical science is built on precise, predictable interventions with clearly mapped cause-effect relationships. The concept of a treatment that adapts itself to conditions encountered seems more akin to biological intelligence than medicine. How did you develop this approach without quantum molecular modeling? Asks a junior researcher, earning reproachful looks from senior members for the unauthorized question. Patel smiles slightly. We didn't have quantum modeling for most of our medical history. We developed treatments through what you might call intelligent trial and error, observing responses, formulating theories, testing incrementally. But the statistical unlikelihood of developing effective treatments without complete molecular understanding. The researcher begins. Sometimes being wrong in interesting ways teaches you more than being partially right. Patel interrupts. Human medicine has a long history of accidental discoveries that led to breakthroughs. The debate continues for hours, with the committee divided between caution and the ethical imperative to offer hope to a terminal patient. Finally, Citizen Thex Anner himself is permitted to address the committee, an unprecedented procedural exception. The frail cooperative citizen, supported by his exoskeleton, fixes multifaceted eyes on the committee. "I have reviewed all available data on the human treatment," he states, his voice strengthened by conviction. "The risk calculation is simple. Without intervention, my cellular degradation reaches critical threshold in 27 days. My offspring inherit the same condition unless we find a treatment. Against certainty of failure, even minimal probability of success becomes rational." The committee appears swayed by the logical argument, until the ethical foundation specialist raises a deeper concern. "Beyond this individual case lies a more troubling question," she notes. "If we permit this treatment and it succeeds, what does it mean for our medical paradigm? A human physician, with limited technology and incomplete understanding of our biology, has potentially solved a problem that has defeated our best minds for millennia." In a private chamber adjacent to the main meeting room, Dr. Patel examines updated scans of Thex Anner's cellular structure. The deterioration pattern isn't identical to the human condition that inspired his approach, but the underlying mechanism shares key characteristics. More intriguing are the self-repair mechanisms he's identified in the cooperative biology, sophisticated systems that their own medical science seems to have overlooked. "Your physicians focus so much on genetic perfection that they've neglected your species' natural resilience," he explains to Thex Anner when they're briefly left alone. "My treatment doesn't fix the genetic flaw. It amplifies your body's existing ability to compensate for it." Thex Anner's translator struggles with the concept. "You mean the solution existed within our biology all along?" "In a manner of speaking," Patel confirms. "Your medical science became so focused on eliminating flaws that it stopped seeing adaptation to imperfection as a valid alternative. When the committee finally renders its decision, the approval for treatment comes with unprecedented restrictions. The procedure must be fully documented, with cooperative medical staff present at every stage. Any unexpected developments must trigger immediate suspension of treatment. What they don't stipulate, because they cannot conceive of it, is how to respond if the treatment succeeds for reasons their medical framework cannot explain. The Strategic Adversarial Network's primary processing core experiences its first operational shutdown in 370 years of continuous function. Engineers work frantically to restore the system while Captain Mendez waits in the observation lounge, sipping the station's approximation of coffee with apparent indifference to the chaos he's caused. Senior strategist Clove Tan enters, his ceremonial military garments exchanged for simple technician's coveralls, a sign of the emergency's severity. "You broke it," he states without preamble. Mendez raises an eyebrow. "I just played the game." "You introduced a paradox. The SAN cannot process your final scenario because it violates fundamental logical parameters." "Which parameters specifically?" Clove Tan's expression shifts to what his species registers as exasperation. "You created conditions where continued conflict ensured mutual destruction, then offered terms that benefited both sides. The SAN is designed to maximize advantage, not accept compromise. So winning isn't always about beating the opponent," Mendez suggests. "Sometimes it's about changing the nature of the contest." "That is not warfare," Clove Tan exclaims. "It's how most human conflicts actually end," Mendez counters. "Pure military victory is rare. Most wars conclude through negotiation when continuing becomes too costly for both sides." The concept visibly disturbs the cooperative strategist. Their military doctrine evolved through millennia of precise optimization, each engagement calculated to produce maximum advantage with minimum resource expenditure. The idea of deliberately creating mutual vulnerability as leverage for negotiation exists nowhere in their tactical framework. "Your approach introduces dangerous uncertainty," Clove Tan argues. "If victory conditions become subjective, how can strategic planning maintain coherence?" "That's exactly the point," Mendez says. "Uncertainty is a fundamental condition, not a variable to be eliminated. Human military doctrine evolved through thousands of years of fighting other humans, equally adaptable, equally unpredictable. We learned that rigid doctrine becomes a vulnerability against creative opponents. In the War College's Central Command Hub, a team of system architects implements emergency modifications to the SAN's core parameters. For the first time since its creation, they must expand its fundamental victory conditions to incorporate concepts of mutual benefit and negotiated resolution. The human's approach is spreading through the network like a contagion, reports the lead architect. The SAN is generating new strategic scenarios based on Mendez's paradigm. Thousands of historical simulations are being recalculated with different outcomes. The college commandant watches with growing alarm as cherished historical examples of tactical brilliance transform into missed opportunities for earlier resolution with fewer casualties. Restrict these revisions to a quarantine subsystem, he orders. The implications are too destabilizing for immediate implementation. But the integration cannot be contained. The SAN's adaptive architecture, designed to incorporate new strategic insights, recognizes Mendez's approach as a superior solution to dozens of long-standing tactical problems. The system isn't malfunctioning, it's evolving. In a private meeting chamber, the college's senior faculty debates the philosophical implications. The discussion quickly transcends military doctrine to question the cooperative's fundamental approach to conflict resolution across all domains. For 12,000 years, we have refined the art of calculated advantage, notes the history keeper. Our diplomatic, economic, and military systems all operate on the same principle, optimizing outcomes through superior position. This human introduces a different framework entirely, intentional interdependence as a pathway to stability. Because their history forced it upon them, observes the psychological warfare specialist. They evolved surrounded by equals, where total victory was rarely achievable. We evolved through controlled competition with clearly defined parameters. In the station's recreational area, Mendez engages a group of junior officers in what began as a simple game, but has evolved into an impromptu seminar on human tactical thinking. Using salt shakers and utensils, he demonstrates principles of asymmetric response and irregular warfare. The weaker force appears to accept the stronger force's choice of battlefield. He explains, but actually transforms the engagement zone through unexpected action. The conventional metrics of strength become irrelevant. The young officers absorb his lessons with growing fascination, their questions becoming increasingly sophisticated as they grasp the implications. Unknown to Mendez, their conversation is being recorded and analyzed by college leadership, who recognize something more concerning than strategic innovation. They're witnessing the contagious spread of human thinking patterns to the next generation of cooperative military leaders. The college commandant's report to the High Council doesn't merely address Mendez's performance in the war games. It warns of an intellectual disruption that could transform cooperative military philosophy from within. The human doesn't defeat our strategies, the report concludes. He changes the conditions that make strategy meaningful. Against such an approach, our traditional advantages become irrelevant. As the human delegation prepares to depart, a final private session is convened in the oldest chamber of the cooperative station, a spherical room lined with materials from the 17-member worlds, symbolizing their unity. Only the highest-ranking council members and the human representatives are present, recording devices deactivated by mutual agreement. High Counselor Vrax Tilm settles his ancient frame into the central podium, compound eyes fixed on Dr. Chen. Before you return to Earth, he begins, we must address implications beyond diplomatic formalities. Your presence has disturbed fundamental assumptions. The human delegation exchanges quick glances, but remains silent. In 6 weeks, Vrax Tilm continues, your engineer improved our propulsion efficiency by 23%. Your military officers introduced tactical concepts that our war college is still struggling to integrate. Your physician developed a treatment for a condition we considered incurable. Your scientist restructured our library's organizational architecture. He pauses, sensory appendages extending toward the humans in what his species recognizes as a gesture of profound respect. Yet you maintain these accomplishments required no exceptional ability. Dr. Chen leans forward. That's because they didn't. At least not by our standards. What looks extraordinary to you represents fairly average human innovation. Impossible, states Counselor Zethtar flatly. The cognitive patterns your species exhibits cannot be commonplace. Engineer Okafor laughs softly. Ever watched human children solve problems? They make connections adults miss because they haven't learned what's impossible yet. Our entire species retains some of that flexibility. Is it biological? Asks the biological sciences counselor. A neurological adaptation. Partly, Dr. Patel acknowledges, but mostly cultural. Human civilization developed through constant adaptation to changing conditions and competition between groups with roughly equal capabilities. We couldn't rely on stable optimization. We needed continuous innovation just to survive. Vraxtilm's sensory appendages tremble slightly. When we first detected your world, we observed your fractured governance, your resource inefficiency, your technological inconsistency. We interpreted these as weaknesses. They are weaknesses, Captain Mendez agrees. They're also strengths. Our inefficiency creates redundancy. Our competition drives innovation. Our inconsistency prevents intellectual stagnation. The council chamber falls silent as the implications settle. The cooperative's 12,000 years of advancement had been built on principles of unified purpose, optimized efficiency, and consistent application, the exact opposite of humanity's chaotic approach. We face an unprecedented decision. Vraxtilm finally says, cooperative protocol dictates a minimum 50-year observation period before integration of new species, yet we find ourselves concerned about permitting your independent development for such a duration. You're afraid of what we might become, Dr. Zhang states quietly, not as accusation but as simple observation. Yes, admits the High Counselor with unexpected candor. Not because we fear conquest. Your delegation has shown no expansionist tendencies. Rather, we fear being rendered irrelevant. Your approaches solve problems our brightest minds considered insurmountable, using methods we cannot predict or counterbalance. Dr. Foster, who has remained unusually quiet throughout the exchange, finally speaks. There's another possibility you haven't considered. Perhaps we're not threats or competitors. Perhaps we're exactly what your cooperative needs. Explain, demands Counselor Zethtar. 12,000 years of incremental optimization has brought your civilization to its current peak, Foster says. But systems that optimize toward perfection eventually reach diminishing returns. Evolution, biological and cultural, requires new variables to overcome stagnation. She gestures to her fellow humans. We're your new variables. The chamber erupts in untranslatable exclamations as council members debate the implications. Some argue for immediate integration, others for extended quarantine. The debate reveals deep ideological fractures that have never before surfaced in the cooperative's carefully maintained consensus. Amid the chaos, Dr. Chen turns to High Counselor Vraxtilm. You still haven't answered my earlier question. Why did you invite us here? Your observation could have continued undetected. The ancient counselor's compound eyes shift to what his species recognizes as an expression of profound revelation. Because despite 12 millennia of advancement, he admits, our civilization has not produced a truly revolutionary idea in over 3,000 years. We perfected what we knew, but stopped discovering what we didn't know we didn't know. He gestures toward the arguing council members, the most animated debate the chamber has witnessed in centuries. You see, already you transform us. Already we begin to question. Already we remember what it means to face true uncertainty. As the human delegation boards their transport vessel for the return journey, Engineer Okafor pauses at the airlock, turning to Dr. Zhang. Think they'll be okay? She asks quietly. Zhang considers the question carefully. They're 12,000 years into a cultural optimization process we've barely begun. But yes, I think encountering us might be the best thing that's happened to them in millennia. And us. What happens when Earth learns about them? Zhang smiles. What humans always do with new information. Chaotic, brilliant, terrible, wonderful things. And we won't even be trying that hard.